Hi, thanks for joining me. I'm Mindy Mandell, and in this video I am going to present Plotinus Ennead on dialectic. Now this one makes a nice accompaniment to the one that was just before it on virtue, and I do have a video on that one as well. I'll give you the link to that here. And there in that essay on virtue, we saw that the goal of developing virtue is to become as godlike as is humanly possible. Plotinus took us through various levels of virtue, focusing on what he called the civic virtues, and then the cathartic virtues, and then finally the theoretic virtues. For more on that, I do recommend the earlier video. But here we are going to see that this development of the virtues is not separate and disconnected from the philosophical quest to know thyself. Today's essay is divided into 6 sections. He opens by describing 2 stages of dialectic. What art is there? What method or practice which will take us up there where we must go? Where that it is to the good, the first principle, we can take as agreed and established. So this is our philosophical goal. But what sort of person should the man be who is to be led on this upward path? Surely one who has seen all, or, as Plato says, who has seen most things, and in the first birth enters into a human child who is going to be a philosopher, a musician, or a lover. This last part in particular, about the philosopher, the musician, and the lover, is a reference to Plato's Phaedrus. That dialogue includes a story of souls journeying up to the back of heaven where they see the true realities. Some souls take in a fuller view of those realities than other souls do, and this determines each soul's next incarnation. Those which take in the fullest vision incarnate as either a philosopher, a musician, or a lover. Plotinus always uses the masculine in his essays, by the way, but of course all of this applies to women as well. The philosopher goes the upward way by nature. The musician and the lover must be led by it. So here Plotinus introduces a distinction within these 3. He will go on to rank them and distinguish them further later in the essay. What then is the method of guidance? Is it one and the same for all of these, or is there a different one for each? There are 2 stages of the journey for all, one when they are going up and one when they have arrived above. The first leads from the regions below. The second is for those who are already in the intelligible realm and have gained their footing there. But they must still travel till they reach the furthest point of the region. That is the end of the journey, when you reach the top of the intelligible. This end of the journey is a reference to Plato's description of dialectic in Book 7 of his Republic. The key in this passage, though, is that there are 2 stages of the journey. This is very much consistent with the Republic, where there is one journey up the steep ascent out of the cave and culminating in seeing the sun itself. And then there is the further journey of rising to the good. Here is a passage from the 7th book of the Republic. Those who have survived the test and approved themselves altogether the best in every task and form of knowledge must be brought at last to the goal. We shall require them to turn upwards the vision of their souls and fix their gaze on that which sheds light on all. And when they have thus beheld the good itself, they shall use it as a pattern for the right ordering of the state and the citizens and themselves throughout the remainder of their lives. And so this, Plotinus tells us, is the second stage of the journey. But there will be more about this later in the essay. By way of describing the two stages, Plotinus will describe the three categories of people. So the rest of section 1 is dedicated to the first of these categories, the musician. First of all, we must distinguish the characteristics of these men. We will begin by describing the nature of the musician. We must consider him as easily moved and excited by beauty, but not quite capable of being moved by absolute beauty. He is, however, quick to respond to its images when he comes upon them. And just as nervous people react readily to noises, so does he to articulate sounds and the beauty in them, and he always avoids what is inharmonious and not a unity in songs and verses, and seeks eagerly after what is rhythmical and shapely. So in leading him on, these sounds and rhythms and forms perceived by the senses must be made the starting point. He must be led and taught to make abstraction of the material element in them, and come to the principle from which their proportions and ordering forces derive, and to the beauty which is in these principles, and learn that this was what excited him, the intelligible harmony and the beauty in it, and beauty universal, not just some particular beauty, and he must have the doctrines of philosophy implanted in him. By these, he must be brought to firm confidence in what he possesses without knowing it. And so this is the first part of stage 1. This is that journey up that steep ascent out of the cave. It is not enough just to read certain books. They must be internalized. The truth that these readings point us to must be recognized in our daily experiences. They must inform the meaning of what we intuit to be meaningful. And now he goes on to what he calls the lover. The lover, into whom the musician may turn and then either stay at that stage or go on farther, has a kind of memory of beauty. So now we are seeing a ranking form. The description of the musician was quite lofty, yet it is the lowest of the three categories. If the musician successfully internalizes philosophy such that he or she sees the universal in the particulars of this realm, then that person has graduated to the level of being a lover. Plato mentions lovers in a number of his dialogues, Alcibiades, Symposium, Phaedrus, to name a few. So now Plotinus is going to explain what a lover truly is. The lover has a kind of memory of beauty, but he cannot grasp it in its separateness. But he is overwhelmingly amazed and excited by visible beauties. So he must be taught not to cling round one body and be excited by that, but must be led by the course of reasoning to consider all bodies, and shown the beauty that is the same in all of them, and that it is something other than the bodies, and must be said to come from elsewhere, and that it is better manifested in other things. For instance, the beauty of ways of life and laws. This will accustom him to loveliness in things which are not bodies, and that there is beauty in arts and sciences and virtues. Now, any of you familiar with Plato's Symposium will likely recognize the ladder of beautiful objects at 210a that leads up to the vision of beauty itself. Then all of these beauties must be reduced to unity, and he must be shown their origin. But from virtues he can at once ascend to intellect, to being, and there he must go the higher way. And this description is that of beauty itself, to use the language of the Symposium, or it is seeing the sun itself in its own place, as described by Plato in his Republic. Yet notice that the journey is not over. This is only the culmination of stage 1. To describe the second stage, Plotinus must introduce the philosopher. But the philosopher, he is the one who is by nature ready to respond and winged, we may say, and in no need of separation like the others. He has begun to move to the higher world and is only at a loss for someone to show him the way. So he must be shown and set free, with his own good will, he who has long been free by nature. Now, the imagery of being winged is a reference to the myth in the Phaedrus of souls flying up to the back of heaven. And here again, we see that distinction Plotinus makes for the philosopher who alone is drawn upward by nature. He must be given mathematical studies to train him in philosophical thought and accustom him to firm confidence in the existence of the immaterial. He will take to them easily, being naturally disposed to learning. He is by nature virtuous and must be brought to perfect his virtues, and after his mathematical studies, instructed in dialectic and made a complete dialectician. This passage makes more sense to those who have studied the Republic. This very much follows Plato's instruction in Book 7 of that dialogue. Arithmetic, geometry, and the other studies that Plato presented there are not math and science as we learned them in grade school. No, these are metaphysical contemplations. And as Plotinus did here, Plato too directs his students to follow these studies with dialectic. Which brings us to the next section. What then is dialectic? It is the science which can speak about everything in a reasoned and orderly way, and say what it is, and how it differs from other things, and what it has in common with those among which it is, and where each of these stands, and if it really is what it is, and how many really existing things there are, and again, how many non-existing things, different from real beings. In dialectic, we focus on some one real being, on an eidos, or what academia calls an idea or a form. We look at what it is and how it functions, both in relation to itself and in relation to others. It discusses good and not good, and the things that are classed under good and its opposite, and what is the eternal, and what not eternal, with certain knowledge about everything and not mere opinion. It stops wandering about the world of sense and settles down in the world of intellect, and there it occupies itself, casting off falsehood and feeding the soul in what Plato calls the plane of truth, using his method of division to distinguish the forms and to determine the essential nature of each thing, and to find the primary kinds, and weaving together by the intellect all that issues from these primary kinds, till it has traversed the whole intelligible world. So dialectic in its proper sense requires our participation in the realm of nous, or intellect. What Plotinus is describing here is an advanced practice used to take us deeper into experience, so as to understand this realm of knowledge. This deepening of our experience propels us even further towards unity itself. Then it resolves again the structure of that world into its parts and comes back to its starting point. And then, keeping quiet, for it is quiet insofar as it is present there, it busies itself no more, but contemplates having arrived at unity. It leaves what is called logical activity about propositions and syllogisms to another art, as it might leave knowing how to write. Some of the matter of logic it considers necessary as a preliminary, but it makes itself the judge of this, as of everything else, and considers some of it useful and some superfluous, and belonging to the discipline which wants it. So doing dialectic is more than merely being logical. Logic is a tool that we use, but something more is going on here. To see this more clearly, Plotinus goes on to discuss the principles of dialectic. Intellect gives clear principles to any soul which can receive them, and then it combines and interweaves and distinguishes their consequences, till it arrives at perfect intelligence. So we are seeing here again that dialectic in its purest form is an advanced practice. It is geared for those out of the cave and able to receive its principles. For, Plato says, dialectic is the purest part of intelligence, or nous, and wisdom, phronesis. So, since it is the most valuable of our mental abilities, it must be concerned with real being and what is most valuable. As wisdom, it is concerned with real being, and intelligence with that which is beyond being. But surely philosophy is the most valuable thing? Are dialectic and philosophy the same? It is the valuable part of philosophy, for it must not be thought to be a tool that the philosopher uses. It is not just bare theories and rules. It deals with things, real things, and has real beings as a kind of material for its activity. It approaches them methodically and possesses real things along with its theories. Now, this is a challenging sentence. What Plotinus is getting at is that dialectic is not just a tool with theories and rules. It has an absolute reality. This is hard to grasp from our modern perspective. We think of physical matter as real, and thoughts as something abstract that lacks substance. From this framework, it is easy to bulk dialectic along with logic and rhetoric and categorize all of them as mere tools to hone our thinking. We can treat them as skills that we can learn at school. Yet, for Platonists, the most fundamental underlying reality for all that truly is the Logos. We can experience the Logos in various ways, including through analogy and through dialectic, both of which truly are. It knows falsehood and sophism incidentally as another's product, and judges falsehood as something alien to the truths in itself, recognizing when anyone brings it forward something contrary to the rule of truth. The key to understanding this point is to remember that dialectic has true being. We participate in it through participation in intellect, or nous. Intellect is the home of the absolute realities, and falsehood does not have true being. Falsehood is foreign to this realm. And now he goes on to the final section of the essay. So dialectic is the valuable part of philosophy. Philosophy has other parts. It also surveys the nature of the physical world. He then says a few words about this aspect of philosophy, which he is calling natural philosophy. He also mentions moral philosophy, the intellectual virtues, and practical wisdom. He goes on to say, dialectic and theoretical wisdom provide everything for practical wisdom to use in a universal and immaterial form. Can the lower kinds of virtue exist without dialectic and theoretical wisdom? Yes, but only incompletely and defectively. The term theoretical wisdom refers to a more mature level of virtue. You can find more on this in Ennead 1-2 or check out my video on it. I also have a video on the excellence of the soul which runs through these levels, and I'll link that one at the end. But for our purposes now, it is enough to think of this as a mature level of wisdom such as Socrates personifies. And for the lower levels of virtue to exist without the higher, as Plotinus is asking about in this passage, would be like somebody who read some of Plato's dialogues and applied some of the teachings about the virtues to their life, but saw all of it in a relatively mundane sense and not a deeper spiritual sense. Like the musician at the beginning of this essay who sees value in images of beauty and may be starting to recognize the beauty behind the images, but falls far short of knowing beauty itself. And can one be a wise man and a dialectician without these lower virtues? It would not happen. They must either precede or grow along with wisdom. In other words, he just wrote about someone who has only what he is calling the lower virtues. But what about someone who has only the higher virtues? Is that possible? He is telling us here that no, it is not. He explains, one might perhaps have natural virtues from which the perfect ones develop with the coming of wisdom. So wisdom comes after the natural virtue and then perfects the character, or rather, when the natural virtues exist, both increase and come to perfection together. As the one progresses, it perfects the other. For in general, natural virtue is imperfect, both in vision and character, and the principles from which we derive them are the most important thing, both in natural virtue and in wisdom. The perfection of virtue that Plotinus is pointing to requires the journey out of the cave and rising to its cause. Cultivating virtue is not separate, then, from spiritual development and the discovery of self. I do hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe if you don't already. You can get notifications when new videos are posted. And as always, thanks for watching.